The Canon EFS 10-18mm STM IS lens is part of Canon's line of special lenses that have a special autofocus mechanism that Canon calls the stepping motor, which allows for much smoother and quieter autofocusing, but this is mainly used for video and can only really be taken advantage of on Canon's cameras that have this feature. But moving on to the lens itself. This lens is going to come in at $299. That is less than half the price of the Canon EFS 10-22mm USM lens, which has similar features. This lens, like the name would imply, has a range of 10-18mm for zooming. Not much of a range, but this allows you to get some extremely wide angles if you are taking photos indoors or doing close-up photography or videos. This is an EFS mount lens, so it will only work with your crop-sensored APS-C cameras. The aperture goes from f4.5 when zoomed all the way out and goes to f5.6 when zoomed in at the full 18mm. This doesn't make it a fast lens to any stretch of the imagination, but when you are indoors you are probably going to want a lower aperture anyway, so that way you can make sure whatever you're shooting is in focus. Being that the body is primarily made out of plastic, it comes in at 240 grams. It has a 67mm filter size, similar to that found on the Canon 18-135mm lens. There are 14 elements and 11 groups in this lens, which, to be honest, I am still trying to figure out the meaning behind. And the closest focusing distance that you can get with this lens is 0.72 feet or 0.22 meters. This is a really fun lens to use for indoor shooting, getting incredibly close to a subject without having an attachment to the lens and getting incredibly wide angles makes it very interesting to see what kinds of new perspectives you can shoot at. Using the lens itself is quite basic. That STM autofocus system definitely makes focusing a lot quieter, but it still seems to act up for me from time to time on my Canon T3i since it doesn't have the proper hardware to handle an STM lens. Video is the same story. Focusing is quite nice since there is far less noise coming from the lens, but it still isn't as fast as manually focusing unless you have a Canon DSLR that can handle STM autofocusing. Photos are quite nice, and since you will be standing in a position in which you want to get the widest view, distortion definitely doesn't seem to be too big of a deal. Macro photos are also great, and at times the camera would be so close that the lens would often cast a shadow on the subject itself. Video also looks great. Having that massive wide angle and getting close to subjects with that macro makes tech reviews like this that much better. The wide angle also lets you get some cool angles when shooting normal videos, but I have noticed you get some distortion from time to time when moving the camera from side to side. But for such a wide angle lens, you are going to get some kind of distortion when bringing in so much. One thing I really appreciate about this lens has to be stabilization. This makes the lens going from something that you would keep in the studio to something that you can bring to events or outdoors. And of course, you can switch off IS at any time should you bring this into a studio environment with a tripod. Wrapping up this review, as someone who hasn't had a lot of experience with wide-angle lenses, I found this lens to be incredible. Getting wide angle both for photos and video is definitely something anyone could take advantage of for creative projects. And being this lens comes in at $300, it is much more affordable to many more people than Canon's other wide angle lenses. Now, knowing this was made for crop sensor cameras, it was clearly not going for any kind of professional audience that uses full frame. And if you don't have STM autofocusing in your camera, that feature becomes relatively pointless. But it is still an amazing lens that gives you wide angles to your photos and video at a price that won't break the bank. I wouldn't recommend getting this lens in place of a standard stock lens, like an 18-55 or 18-135 in my case. But get it for the same reason you would get a 50mm prime lens. There are always going to be instances that you want to get a wider angle or you want to get a little bit closer to your subject. And if you are one who knows they are going to be in many of those situations with your camera and need a lens on the cheap, I couldn't think of a better recommendation than this one.